such an important point that people have to understand about the history of dictatorship is that they rally all the sadists of a society, all the psychopaths together into positions of power to carry out the terror of the regime. And part of that includes violent scapegoating, as we saw with concentration camps, in the Holocaust, as we saw in the Gulag in the Soviet Union, and so on it goes. It's extremely dangerous.
Hello, and welcome to the PoliticsGirl podcast. I'm your host, Lee McGowan. Let's get into it. Today, I'm joined by Andrea Chalupa, a Brooklyn-based journalist, author, and filmmaker who is also the host and producer of the Webby Award honoree podcast, Gaslit Nation. A student of Soviet history at the University of California, Davis, and Ukrainian history at the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, Andrea's commitment to human rights was inspired by her parents, who were born in European displaced persons camps after World War II. Andrea is the writer and director of the short documentary, The Holodomor, Stalin's Secret Genocide, shown at the United Nations, and she played a key role in organizing the March for Truth, a movement demanding transparency in the Russia-Trump investigation that had marches all over 130 cities in the spring of 2017. An author whose works include graphic novel In the Shadow of Stalin and Dictatorship, It's Easier Than You Think, Andrea frequently speaks at events on the focus of global affairs, U.S. politics, and saving democracy. I'm having Andrea on today to talk about two broad strokes topics. What's going on in Ukraine, because I think most of us have kind of checked out there and we don't have a clue, and what Trump will offer in a second term in regards to American immigration, which I have to tell you, doing the research on it made me physically sick to my stomach. And it's just one more reason why this absolute monster cannot become our president again. So without further ado, please welcome my guest, writer, producer, and passionate warrior against the threat of fascism around the globe, Andrea Chalupa. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm so excited to read your book.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited people are finally going to get to read it. So thank you for saying that. And thanks for coming on. I've been listening to you on Gaslit Nation since right after Trump was elected in 2016. So you have been terrifying me for years.
Good.
So thank you very much. But in all honesty, I really appreciate you coming because you're going to share your expertise on two big issues that seem incongruous but are really highly connected. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has so much to do with what Putin believes is his, and what Trump and his team are planning to do in America with immigration has so much to do with who they think America belongs to. And it's also about what happens when authoritarians go unchecked. So I'm really glad you're here.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for shining a light on all these very urgent issues.
Yeah, I really want my audience to know what's going on so they have a real sense of the world and they can go out there and be like, yep, I know what that is, and that's wrong. And I think it's really important that we go out into the world like that. But before we get into those topics, you have been warning us of the dangers of rising authoritarianism around the world for years. This is something you have been doing. And whether that was anything from what was going on on January 6th to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, you've been saying, hey, pay attention to this, pay attention. And in fact, last year, you released an illustrated book called Dictatorship, It's Easier Than You Think, which is sort of a tongue-in-cheek look at dictatorship. It's basically a how-to manual with lessons from Hitler and Stalin and Mussolini and Putin and Kim Jong-un about how to seize power and consolidate it. And essentially, it seems like you wanted to show people that it's not that hard to follow the dictator's playbook, that these dictators aren't some brilliant geniuses. They're actually quite unoriginal, and we can easily predict what their next step is going to be.
1,000,000,000%. All we're seeing is the dictator playbook again and again. It's disinformation, it's scapegoating, it's playing the victim, it's being a martyr, like what Trump is doing right now with his trial, acting like a martyr of the justice system when rich white guys like him typically tend to get away with these types of crimes. And he's finally getting caught after all these years and facing some serious jail time, hopefully, fingers crossed. And so ultimately, back to your earlier point, like what is the connection between Russia and Trump? Trump wants to make America Russia. When he says he wants to make America great again, what he really means is he wants to make America Russia, where you have the elite, where you have an oligarchy class living above the law, living above accountability, enriching itself, using the government like its own piggy bank as we saw with Jared and Ivanka in the White House, enriching themselves to the tune of, I think, hundreds of millions of dollars. Right.
$640 million Ivanka made in the 4 years she worked for the White House.
That's Russia. That's how Russia operates. It's the state is your private piggy bank. And so Putin, when we talk about Russia and the dictatorship, Putin sort of becomes this mascot, this cartoon character, but really he's just the Botoxed face. And it's true that Putin gets Botox. You can see it, all the puffiness and like the really smooth lines in places where it shouldn't be. So Putin is really the face of this much larger, corrupt government where you have all of these oligarchs in power and their children in power, and they're all feeding off of the state budget. That's why when Russia first launched its total war in Ukraine in early 2022, one of the biggest advantages that Ukraine had to fight for survival in that very key moment was Russia's own corruption, because so many people in the military were stealing from the top all the way to the bottom that like you didn't have adequate food and other necessities being delivered to the front because stuff was just being stolen. And so when Trump is here, trying to get all of his base riled up, his brown shirts, his stormtroopers, using this violent political rhetoric, what he's doing is trying to overthrow our democracy here so they can have their elite cabal and enrich themselves and turn America into a corrupt dictatorship like Russia.
Yeah. I can totally see that. I mean, from your book, which is essentially written for children, but I loved it very much because it's simple, and I think things should be simple. It's also the stigmatizing of minority groups, right? Saying like, these are your enemies, these are the people poisoning the blood of the nation, right? It's propaganda, which of course has been supersized in the age of social media. It's technology, which is only continuing to grow and help dictators not only spread their lies, but keep their civilians under surveillance. I mean, you've been incredibly clear that every single democracy in the world is vulnerable, that no one is immune to this virus, which you call it, and I think it's a brilliant word, virus of authoritarianism. And I just want to go back to the book because in it you say numerous times that dictators don't just achieve this power on their own, that they require the help of useful idiots, which is a term we hear all the time, a useful idiot. In fact, it almost seems like the larger theme of your dictatorship book is the concept of the useful idiot. People who help these dictators into power, and then you're like, well, what did they get out of it? Like, what did they think they were getting out of it? Because they just put this guy above everybody, and then they think, well, wait a second, this guy just took half my company, and it's amazing how many people, and I see that all the time with the super rich here in America. They think, well, my taxes are going to be low, and I'm like, boy, you're going to be paying a tariff to Donald Trump as soon as he's in power. What do these media companies think they're doing, right? Like, they're not staying in business after Donald Trump comes back into power. Half those media companies will be closed unless they're being RT and spreading the party line.
Exactly right. And that is the lesson that the elites refuse to learn throughout history. All fascist movements, from Mussolini to Pinochet, came to power with the help of the financial elite, the business elite. Hitler, of course, as well. It's another example. And now with Donald Trump, you have Wall Street lining up behind him, thinking that this is...
And Silicon
Valley. And they're thinking that Trump is going to roll back regulations, roll back their taxes, allow them to continue hoarding their hundreds of billions of dollars of wealth abroad, and they'll all become rich. We're living in a time of worsening income inequality that's even greater than the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age. That's where we are right now. The rich are getting exponentially richer, and the rest of us are falling way behind, falling through the cracks. The middle class is disappearing. And what these elites don't realize is that once you give a dictator power, there are no laws anymore. There are no checks and balances anymore. Any business elite that dared to stand up to Putin because quality of life was diminishing under all that corruption of Putin's reign. Any business elite that dared to try to run against him had their fortune liquidated, and they were thrown in prison and then forced into exile. So once you get a dictator in power, it's game over. The only people that matter is the dictator and his immediate family, because that's what they do. They surround themselves with family. They put family in positions of power because that's how they protect and preserve loyalty and their regime.
And obviously we're seeing it with the Trump family here. It's unbelievable. Now, if Dictatorship is easier than you think, the book, is aimed at younger readers, encouraging them to read about this kind of topic without having to say, read Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny. Your most recent book, In the Shadow of Stalin, The Story of Mr. Jones, which comes out in September, is a graphic novel adaptation of your film Mr. Jones, which provides historical context for the Russian war today. So I feel like it's all kind of synergistic. So tell me why you made that film quickly before we go on to everything. And then tell me why you felt you wanted to turn it into a graphic novel after the fact.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in California, and growing up, I was extremely close to my grandfather, my Dilonya, who was born and raised in Donbass, Ukraine, a region of eastern Ukraine that's been under invasion since the very start of this war 10 years ago. My grandfather was the world to me. I used to sing songs from The Little Mermaid at the top of my lungs, and he loved it. And when he passed, when he died, when I was around the age of 11, he left me his memoir typed in Ukrainian. And I took it with me to Ukraine, and I lived there for several months after college. Reading the translated pages of his life story, I was really struck by how my grandfather witnessed the Russian Revolution as a small boy. He barely survived Stalin's genocide famine in 1933. He was arrested and tortured as a young father during Stalin's purges. He lived all the events that Orwell allegorized as an Animal Farm. And so I always felt really close to George Orwell, and I wanted to pay tribute to my grandfather and the countless millions that suffered under Stalin, under the Soviet regime. And so I wrote and produced this journalistic thriller, Mr. Jones, which is about the real-life journalists that risked their lives and careers to expose Stalin's genocide famine in Ukraine. And that film was directed by three-time Academy Award nominee Agnieszka Holland, who did the original The Secret Garden, and she directed a lot of extraordinary films like Europa, Europa, and several episodes of The Wire and House of Cards and The Affair and so on. And it stars James Norton and Vanessa Kirby and Peter Sarsgaard, and it's just a rich, gorgeous, powerful film. I wrote it. I did not direct it. So I can applaud all the people who appear on screen and put all of their beautiful brain power into making it. It's just this sweeping epic that shows this little known genocide that shaped the world, and how so many in the West, the useful idiots around the West, turned a blind eye to it because they were greedy, getting rich off of dirty Russian money that was flowing to the West. So they're basically bought off, the newspapers, big business. So it's a lot about what happened today and the forces that gave rise to Trump today. I did not expect this film to be about the present day. It was always a tribute, a monument to my grandfather. And unfortunately, history is repeating because we don't learn enough history. And the graphic novel, I love the story so much. It's just such this Alice in Wonderland adventure of searching for the truth and fighting for the truth and the power of the truth and how the truth cannot be killed. And that's what the story is a testament to. And so I wanted a graphic novel version that could go into schools and that, students could devour this sort of real life adventure and look at these real life heroes that risk so much for the truth.
Yeah. And the importance of getting the truth out there, because we really did have a lot of journalists during that time who really did turn a blind eye to it, much like we're seeing today, where you think, what are these journalists doing? Not telling us the truth of what's happening, not telling us the truth back in 2016. We didn't need to have Trump if they had just told the truth back then, Everyone thinks they can control these dictator types, and they never can. Let's move on to what's going on with Ukraine. You pointed out recently that in 2019, Putin acted like it was absolutely outrageous that anyone would suggest that he would ever attack Ukraine. And now he's saying it's absolutely outrageous that anyone would suggest that Russia would ever attack a NATO nation. I think the problem is that people are just so desperately out of touch with the devastation in Ukraine. I know I am in many ways. Would you mind if I lay out some of the things that I do know, and then you can tell me if I'm lost in American talking points or if these are things that everybody should know?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So I know that this war belongs squarely on Putin's shoulders, that it is in some ways a proxy hot war in a cold war between autocracy and democracy. Does that seem fair?
I wouldn't call it a proxy war for the simple fact that nobody wanted this war except the Russians.
Okay.
The West was getting rich off of Russian money. Angela Merkel, new reporting just came out on how
this is the chancellor of
the
Germany,
former chancellor of Germany for 20 years. New reporting just came out confirming what many of us already suspected, that Angela Merkel knew that Germany increasing its dependence on Russian gas would be a blackmail pressure point for Russia to control Germany, because Germany was so increasingly dependent on Russian gas. And she still went ahead with those gas deals anyway. And that's just an example of how the Western world, Western democracies, where you had this inflow of Russian oligarch money to cultural institutions like the Tate in London, to universities like MIT, this was easy money. Why would they want to lose this source of revenue? They didn't want this war with Russia. They really desperately wanted to normalize relations with Russia. A proxy war makes it seem as though there's some imperialist fight between the US and Russia through Ukraine, when that's simply not true. The truth of the matter is that Russia has always been an empire. When it was the Soviet Union, it was the Russian Empire. When it was the Russian Empire, it was the Russian Empire. Putin is very much like every czar that has come before him. This is all that Russians know. They have this chauvinist mindset that it's their God-given right to rule, and that all the other ethnic states within the current borders of Russia, because remember, Russia's a federation of several ethnic states. All those ethnic states, all of the neighboring states that were once under the Russian Empire are all beneath them. The way that Russians talk about, for instance, Ukrainians, it's so dehumanizing. They're like servants, they're serfs or whatever. And there's just such a gross sense of ownership that Russians feel towards Ukrainians. Like, we're entitled to your land, you're ours. But what the Western audience has to understand is that deep, deep, deep in the Russian ruling psyche, and very much among the Russian people, because every single dictator, including Putin, needs a base of support, and he has a base of support. There's millions of Russians that think this is great. I love the war. I love Putin. I love my life in Russia. And they really do buy in to this psychology of Russian greatness, being Russian imperialism. And people have to understand that, because that's everything here, everything. And the second point is, what is the whole point of imperialism? It's a smash and grab to make money, to enrich yourself. So when you look at Putin's court of oligarchs, all the oligarchs that surround Putin, they're not just rich because of the industries that they control. They all have their fingers in the military. The Russian oligarchs are the military-industrial complex. So they need these wars in order to enrich themselves. They need to invade other countries. And they're spreading that imperialist influence all across Africa right now. You could do a whole episode on what Russia's doing in Africa and spreading its influence and engineering coups there. And the reason for that is because when they come into a country like Ukraine, they steal the natural resources, they steal the land, they steal the bank accounts, the financial institutions, and they claim it as theirs. And it's like modern day piracy. And so Russian imperialism is what we're up against. And it goes very deep in the Russian psyche. And number two, imperialism is a violent and unfortunately very easy way to enrich themselves. It's much harder for the Russians to invest in universities, to invest in tech companies that are going to develop the products that we need for tomorrow to build the future. Why is that harder? Well, because it's hard for any country to develop successful innovation. But most importantly, Russia doesn't want to make those developments in innovation, because when you have an enlightened population that's innovating, then you have a population that's going to challenge your rule because they expect better, because they're smart. And so you have sort of this dumbing down of Russian culture, of the Russian masses under Putin, in order to keep people subjugated to this Russian imperialist mindset where might makes right.
It's the same idea over here with, like, I love the uneducated, and don't send your children to these liberal colleges because they turn into woke monsters. And it's like, well, what you're really doing is expanding people's minds. And once you expand people's minds, they start asking questions. And if you ask questions, then you might challenge the status quo. And that doesn't serve the people in the status quo. So people like Putin, he doesn't want people to be educated and question why things are the way they are. He wants to keep people, like you're saying, subjugated. But that probably also explains why one of the things he's targeting in Ukraine are the libraries and the schools and the cultural heritage moments so that people don't know what their culture is. So their culture is destroyed, why he's taking children from Ukrainians and giving them to Russians to raise as Russian. That kind of destroying of a culture, a true genocide, if you will, that is really, truly terrible for not just the Ukrainian people, but for the world order at large, everything we've sort of been trying to do since the end of World War II.
Absolutely, because what it does is it violates international law.
Yeah.
It's like the might makes right, which makes all of us vulnerable.
Yeah. Okay, so I know that Biden recently apologized to President Volodymyr Zelensky for the months-long congressional holdup on the weapons that the Republicans held back that really allowed Russia to advance into Ukraine more than they should have if they had had everything that they needed. I know that the G7 is in Italy June 13th to 15th, which will be followed by the Ukrainian Peace Summit June 15th to 16th in Switzerland. But you and I are recording this episode on June 12th. So the podcast won't air until June 18th, so we will know a lot more about what happened at both events by the air date, and people should go and look up what happened. What are your thoughts on both the G7 and this Ukrainian Peace Summit?
I think G7 is important for Biden and the Europeans to get together and finally make a meaningful deal to use the frozen Russian assets to give as much aid out of those assets to Ukraine right now.
And if I may, just for the
Sure.
audience, if they don't know, the U.S. is pushing for $50 billion of frozen Russian assets that were done when Russia invaded Ukraine, and they froze a bunch of assets around the world, and to give that money to Ukraine. But the 7 nations of the G7, who, if people don't know, is the U.S., the U.K., Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, haven't yet agreed to this. But the Biden administration is leading this campaign to persuade these leaders to sign off on giving the money to Ukraine to help their prospects on the battlefield, to help rebuild things. And it really seems like Ukrainians desperately need this help. So this is a key point for the National Security Advisor. He's been out, Jake Sullivan, saying this is a priority for the United States and it should be a priority for the G7. If the world's richest economies kind of got together and said, we're sending this money to Ukraine, it's a message to Putin that says, you're not going to outlast them. They're not going to run out of money. They're not going to run out of support. This is a losing battle for you. And I know that Zelensky himself will be at the G7 to put a face to that ask for help. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And what is critical and also chilling for us to understand about this movement is what the Democratic allies are pushing to do is to front load Ukraine with as much aid as possible now in case Trump should win. That's the ticking clock. That's what they're doing this for.
Because they know they'll cut him off and he will do whatever Putin wants.
Exactly. So they're trying to front load Ukraine right now in these last critical months before the US election. They are so committed when all of them, the Democratic Alliance has said with one voice that we are in this for however long it takes for Ukraine to win. All of these European allies are making years-long financial commitments to Ukraine. Well, the US has Congress, MAGA Congress, that deliberately held up aid for 6 critical months. And so the workaround to get more critical aid now without having to deal with Mike Johnson's house, MAGA Mike Johnson, is for Biden and the rest of the G7 to finally make a deal on unfreezing these Russian oligarch assets or some portion of it, like working out the financial instrument of it is a little bit more complicated, but the point is using these frozen Russian assets to front load Ukraine with as much aid as possible so that it can have a fighting chance should Trump win.
Good Lord, should Trump win. I mean, I don't know what was happening there. Okay, so let's put Trump winning to the side for now.
But we're not going to let that happen. We are not going to let that happen
because honestly, that would be disaster for world democracies and everywhere across the world. And we need people to really, truly understand what he is planning. But after the G7, Switzerland invited 160 countries to a Ukrainian Peace Summit. As of this taping, only 90 countries have agreed to go. The Swiss president has said that the aim of the event is to set us on a path towards ending the war, which is, of course, interesting to try and do when Russia will not be at the conference. Switzerland originally did not invite Russia because they said they had no interest in participating, and they were mad that Switzerland was no longer a neutral territory since it had collaborated with sanctions imposed by the European Union after Russia invaded Ukraine. But the Swiss government has been really clear that Russia is invited. They would love it if they jointly could define some sort of roadmap to include Russia and Ukraine to the peace process. But I feel like the point is Russia doesn't really want a peace process.
Exactly right. Russia wants all of Ukraine. Ukraine is rich with natural resources. Ukraine has always been called the breadbasket of Europe. It's one of the major agricultural producers in the world. On top of that, it has all sorts of like rich metals and other heavy industries. Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, is considered the Jerusalem of the Slavs. It's a holy city for Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. And so Russia wants to steal all of that, appropriate it all for itself. And that's the goal. And it's to enrich itself and to also build that Russian imperial greatness. That's the motivation. They're not going to stop unless they are stopped. And the Global Democratic Alliance has to really dig in and be ready for the long haul here. And that's what they are doing with this G7 summit. And as for the Switzerland peace talks, that's an essential international message, really conveying to voters around the world, especially voters across Europe, where we just saw the European elections, where the far right had this huge surge in the polls. And part of the reason was driven by disinformation, driven by simple populist fake promises for complex solutions. You had a lot of far right candidates bashing Ukraine and trying to play into this whole nonsense of Ukraine fatigue. And so by having this international Swiss peace summit, what you're doing is you're showing voters across Europe that we are working on ending the war. Of course, we want an end to the war, and we have a peace plan. And so it's really reassuring everybody, especially the voters, that the Democratic Alliance is working towards peace. And the problem is that the aggressor here is determined for war. So it really underscores what the challenge is and that they are working towards an off-ramp. This isn't going to be another land for peace deal. It's not that, because the reality is the Western alliance under President Obama pretty much gave land for peace when Putin seized Crimea in 2014. The assumption was, okay, you took Crimea, we'll let you have Crimea and just leave it there. But then he goes into East Ukraine. And then we're like, okay, we're going to let you have a bit of East Ukraine and just let that be a frozen conflict and just we'll leave it there. And then he goes and lobs missiles against the entire country and tries to march to Kiev, So the bottom line is that Russian imperialism is what we're up against, and they will not be stopped unless they are stopped.
Yeah. So we've tried this, you took it and that's fine and let's have peace. That didn't work. And so now it's you will be defeated, period, the end. It's interesting to see who's going to the summit in Switzerland because obviously all the Western powers are there, but a bunch of other countries aren't coming because their relationship with Moscow seems to be better than their relationship with the West. And nations like Turkey and Africa currently haven't said whether they will go yet. Obviously, we'll know if they decided when the podcast comes out. India has said it will come, but it's not sure how much it will participate.
Well, India is benefiting off of that cheap Russian gas.
There we go.
So they've been making a lot of money off of Putin's war.
And Brazil and China said they're not going to go unless Russia takes part. And of course, Zelensky has been very clearly coming out saying China's in bed with Russia, and China is not thrilled with that. I don't think he's wrong, but I can understand why they're angry.
Again, you have these countries like Brazil and South Africa that see Ukraine as a proxy war between U.S. imperialism and Russian imperialism, when the reality is the U.S. really did not want this war. And American foreign policy ever since the start of the Obama administration, when they launched the Russian reset, was hopeful thinking that if we can just be positive and diplomatic and welcoming, that we can make Russian imperialism go away. But the problem is that the Kremlin is totally dependent on Russian imperialism to stay in power, to enrich themselves, and to give their people any sense of meaning as their quality of life deteriorates under Kremlin corruption.
Yeah. I think the bottom line here is that every day that Russia continues its assault on an independent nation is a threat, not only to Ukraine, not only to Eastern Europe or to the NATO allies that are around there, but to all of the efforts that have been made since World War II to build some sort of global peace through international rule of law. Let's take a break for a few words from our sponsors, and then we're going to come back and talk about Trump's horrifying plans for immigration in America. Today's podcast is sponsored by Sundays for Dogs. You've heard me talk about my golden doodle Chips before. He's a dream boy, the most brilliant, lovely, handsome, kind dog you've ever had. I couldn't love him anymore, but he is a very picky eater with a sensitive stomach, so I can tell you in all honesty that finding food like Sundays for Dogs that he will actually eat was such a pleasure. Sundays for Dogs is a fresh dog food made from a short list of human-grade ingredients. It was co-founded by a practicing veterinarian who tests and formulates every version of each recipe. Sundays contains 90% meat, 10% superfoods, and 0% synthetic nutrients or artificial ingredients. And unlike other fresh dog foods, Sundays doesn't require refrigeration or preparation because of their air drying process, so you can just pour it and serve. And as I've said before, I know this sounds stupid, but we love the bag it comes in because the reseal strip, it just works so well. Like, you wish that all your Ziplocs worked like this. Why companies haven't figured out what Sundays for Dogs has figured out is beyond me, but it makes using the food so much easier. Chips likes the beef, he likes the chicken, his stomach is normal and settled. I even give it to him sometimes between meals when he's feeling a little peckish. And yes, I can tell when my boy needs a little bit more food. I'm making less garbage with the canned foods, and it's delivered to my home on reoccurring order. The whole thing is just efficient and effective. So if you want to try this terrific food for your dog, get 40% off your first order of Sundays by going to sundaysfordogs.com/politicsgirl or use the code PoliticsGirl at checkout for 40% off. Because I know your dog is just as special to you as Chips is to me, and they deserve food that is not only great for them, but that they want to eat. So check out sundaysfordogs.com/politicsgirl. I know you won't be disappointed. Do you ever feel like money is just flying out of your account and you have no idea where it's going? Well, I know. It's going to your subscriptions. Think about it. Between streaming services, fitness apps, delivery services, parenting apps, it's endless. I'm totally guilty of this. I sometimes sign up for things and then I totally forget that I did it and I keep paying without ever using the app or the service, which is why Rocket Money is so great. Rocket Money helps you find out what subscriptions you're actually spending money on and cancel the ones you don't want anymore. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills. It shows you all your subscriptions in one place, and if there's something you don't want anymore, you can cancel it with a tap. Rocket Money will even try to get a refund for the last couple of months of wasted money and negotiate to lower your bills for up to 20%. All you have to do is take a picture of your bill and Rocket Money does the rest. It's a terrific service, which is probably why Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, and saving its members an average of $720 a year. So stop wasting money on things that you don't use and cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/politicsgirl. That's rocketmoney.com/politicsgirl. One more time, rocketmoney.com/politicsgirl. Support for today's episode comes from OneSkin. And if you have sensitive skin, then you know how hard it can be to find a product that doesn't cause irritation. But OneSkin's topical supplements are formulated with soothing ingredients and natural antioxidants and are gentle enough to use every day. Free from over 1,500 chemicals and preservatives that can make your skin red or irritated or itchy, their products are safe for sensitive skin. OneSkin's products are powered by their scientifically proven peptide called OS1. This peptide reduces the accumulation of damaged, aging cells, the ones that make your skin less resilient and more prone to lines and wrinkles. OneSkin has a full line of face and body products, including Shield, which is their sunscreen and what I've been using, that prevents UV-induced aging and repairs cellular aging all at once. I wear it every day. I really like it. It's smooth, it's easily absorbed, and as someone with sensitive skin, I have had absolutely no trouble with it. Founded by an all-woman team of scientists, OneSkin's products are backed by an extensive lab and clinical data to validate their success and safety on all skin types. Not only that, they're the first and only skin company to target cellular sentience, which is a key hallmark of aging. Their topical supplements are the easiest way to keep your skin healthy and hydrated without the harsh ingredients or irritation often found in other skincare products. So try it for yourself. OneSkin is more than skincare. It's about skin longevity, targeting the root causes of aging to help you look and feel your best at every age. Get started today with 15% off by using the code PoliticsGirl at oneskin.co. That's 15% off at oneskin.co with the code PoliticsGirl. And after you purchase, when they ask you how you heard about them, please support the show and tell them that we sent you. It's time to expect more from your skincare routine. Invest in the health of your skin with OneSkin. PoliticsGirl is lucky to have a returning sponsor, Lumi, back on our podcast. Lumi is a whole body deodorant, making it so you never have to worry about BO again. Unlike other deodorants, Lumi is powered by mandelic acid to control odor in a new way. Lumi delivers 72-hour odor control everywhere from your pits to your feet, and yes, even your privates. In fact, it was patients concerned about the potential odor of their privates that originally inspired the OBGYN who invented Lumi. 6 years later, she has created a game-changing whole-body deodorant that has earned over 300,000 five-star reviews from people who now feel confident about how they smell from head to toe. Lumi is clinically proven to block odor all day and control odor for up to 3 days. Unlike traditional deodorant that try to mask odor with fragrance, Lumi is formulated to stop odor before it starts. So you could think of it more as a pre-odorant rather than a deodorant. It's baking soda and paraben free and pH balanced for safe use below the belt. You can choose from a variety of fresh, clean scents like clean tangerine, lavender, sage, or toasted coconut, and the always classic unscented. So give it a try for yourself. We're going into summer, so this might be the perfect time to try a Lumi starter pack for new customers. It comes with a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, and 2 free products of your choice, like a mini body wash or deodorant wipes, plus free shipping. And as a special for listeners, new customers get 15% off all Lumi products with our exclusive code PoliticsGirl. And you can use the 15% off with the already discounted starter pack, and that ends up equaling 40% off their starter pack. So use the code PoliticsGirl for 15% off your first purchase at LumiDeodorant.com. That's LumiDeodorant.com/PoliticsGirl. Walk into the summer confident that absolutely everything on your body smells good with Lumi. LumiDeodorant.com. And we're back. So let's address some issues closer to home. You have been very clear that people need to be paying attention to what a future Trump administration would do to immigration in this country. So do you want to tell people why you're concerned?
Yeah, there is an extraordinary documentary that everyone should see. I had the filmmakers on my podcast, Gaslit Nation. It's called Missing in Brooks County. And it shows what the border crisis looks like and how militarized it is and what a human rights crisis this has created, leading to countless avoidable deaths of asylum seekers. And what you have essentially is a white supremacist Rambo culture, very militarized, that just seeks to create an intentional cruelty along the border that makes it basically certain death to try to cross over in any part, into the U.S. This will all get exponentially worse under Trump. You'll have more families intentionally separated. You'll have max cruelty. The cruelty is the point. They justify it in their minds, like the Stephen Millers of the system, the Bannons. They justify it in their minds that cruelty is a deterrent. But really, there's also a sadistic element. All dictatorships, all of them, were ruled by sadists, people who enjoyed inflicting pain on others. And that sort of level of cruelty was a recruitment tool for other sadists to come and join their forces, their security forces, where the regime grows into a terror regime. And that's what would happen. That's what we would be facing when it came to immigration under Trump. Yes, Biden has gotten his criticism for immigration, including for holdover policies from the Trump administration. But whatever Biden's faults are currently, Trump will be exponentially worse and devastating. And when we talk about Russia's influence in all this, it has to be noted that the immigration crisis we right now have on the US border, where you have migrants, asylum seekers, being bused by the hundreds to cities like mine in New York City that are already under strain because of our budget crisis. And you have a lot of people falling through the cracks with mental illness and cuts to libraries and schools. And now we have migrants being shipped up from Florida, from Texas. This is basically human trafficking by DeSantis and Abbott of Texas. That migrant crisis, most of these people are coming from Venezuela. Venezuela is a dictatorship that is backed by Russia. It is financially and militarily backed by Russia. There were growing protests in Venezuela a couple years ago. The Russians sent planes of their own forces to squash those protests. So the current regime of Venezuela has created a famine, and that has led to a refugee crisis on par with the Syrian civil war. And so that is the end game of Russia. That is the end game of dictatorship. I know it's boring at this point to talk about the dictator playbook, but it's really that you come to power, you stay in power, they can't get rid of you, and you don't care who you need to kill or crush that stands in your way as long as you die rich, powerful. That's the end game. That's what the dictator of Venezuela is after. That's what Putin is after. And that's what Trump and his family will be after should they get in again.
Yeah, we did a whole episode on the rise of authoritarianism around the world and how they're all connected. And we talked a lot about Anne Applebaum's article about it, and she called it Autocracy Inc., that it's like a corporation with all of these big players in the C-suites, the Russias and what Trump wants to be, and, honestly, in some ways, Netanyahu, but also Turkey and Hungary and Orban and China. These guys want to rule the way they want to rule. They don't even have a cohesive ideology. It's not like they're all believing in something. They all believe in their own success, their own top-down power, and staying in power at all costs and making money at all costs. And it's all kind of connected, right? So then we look at what Trump would do to America with all of that power behind him, all of that money behind him, and the way he wants to consolidate the entire government around him. And then, like you said, the cruelty is the point, because he's not just planning to revive most of his hardline xenophobic immigration policies from his first term. He wants to expand them. He wants to make them, quote unquote, tougher, right? He wants to sharply restrict both legal and illegal immigration. They are talking about major plans to round up undocumented people in the United States, not just at the border, throughout the entire United States, and then put them in camps until they can be expelled. They have talked about plans to scour the country for unauthorized immigrants and deport people by the millions. And they are not talking about going through due process to deport people. They are talking about advancing the whole thing so you don't require due process. He says that he plans to reassign other federal agents to immigration and customs enforcement, to deputize local police officers. Like you said, it's a call to people who are sadists. It's a call to people who are xenophobic. It's a call to racists, and and calling in the National Guard to do their own versions of Roundup. You were mentioning Stephen Miller, who is basically a Nazi, and he's the author of the original Muslim ban. And he said the Trump administration would shift the process from arresting specific people who have overstayed their visas or this kind of thing to carrying out full workplace raids and other sweeps of public places where they just round up groups of people and get a whole bunch of unauthorized immigrants all at once. And I'm sure that will go incredibly well in a nation that is so highly armed. They're talking about bringing in the kind of attorneys and the right kind of policy thinkers so they can move this whole thing through without actually worrying about human rights or the rule of law. And I think we have to get so serious about this. They're talking about building giant camps in Texas on the border. So we're basically going to build concentration camps.
Exactly right.
In a country that prides itself on its freedom.
And again, these are recruitment tools for sadists, for people that fancy themselves Rambo, that feel like they have a right to dehumanize others. That is such an important point that people have to understand about the history of dictatorship, is that they rally all the sadists of a society, all the psychopaths together into positions of power to carry out the terror of the regime. And part of that includes violent scapegoating, as we saw with concentration camps, in the Holocaust, as we saw in the Gulag in the Soviet Union, and so on it goes. It's extremely dangerous.
Yeah. And to take us back to the idea of all these rich guys in Silicon Valley and Wall Street that are supporting Trump, I feel like I shouldn't have to, but I need to point out what this kind of mass deportation, mass roundups, mass chaos would do to our economy. Not just losing millions of workers in America at once, how much money would be lost to all these people that pay at least sales tax every day living in America, not to mention how much money it would cost to keep these camps running and how much cost it's going to be to have the government fly them out. None of this seems fiscally responsible, to be quite honest, which is probably why Trump and Stephen Miller have already made plans to get around any refusal by Congress to appropriate the money to pay for these camps by redirecting money from our military budget like they did the first time when he wanted to pay for the wall. And Congress was like, we're not paying for the wall, man. You said Mexico was going to pay for the wall. And he was like, I'm doing it anyway. And he took money from the military budget because he's not going to wait to do the right thing. He's not going to wait to do the way our government was set up. He's not going to say, well, Congress appropriates the money and I wait for the money. There's no checks and balances with Trump. And that's the whole point. He's going to ignore how we do it and just do what he wants to do. And I keep saying to people, like, you might be anti-immigration. You might feel like, yeah, that's what I want him to do. Like he's going to say, fuck you, Congress. And, I'll do whatever I want to do. But what he's actually saying is fuck you, voter, right? Because Congress is there to represent the people. That is their job. And he's saying, I don't care what the people say because I don't care what Congress says and I'll do whatever I want to do, whenever I want to do. And that should freak anybody out. It doesn't even matter how you feel about immigration.
1,000,000,000%. Yeah, it's really scary that we're at this point now, and it's all thanks to the Electoral College that he even stands a chance. And we really need to get united on reforming the Electoral College. There's a movement that's been building, especially coming out of the Trump years, called the National Voter Pact. And it's very close to getting the electoral votes needed that would make the current Electoral College obsolete, meaning enough states are signing on or will soon be signing on in the coming years, where those states have pledged that their electoral votes will go to the winner of the popular vote. Because that's how it should be. The
national popular vote winner, even if their state did not go to the national popular vote winner.
That's how it should be.
Because we can't carry on like this with 7 million more people in America wanting one path for America and us losing to the minority. And it is a very interesting proposal that they're making.
Oh, it's growing. It's growing in steam.
Yeah.
I recently had one of the organizers on Gaslit Nation, and they're getting closer and closer. There's legislation up in Michigan and some other key states. So we really have to focus on the kind of country we want to live in and remind ourselves that another world is possible. And that I know it's like so much doom and gloom out there, but there's a lot of extraordinary people on the front lines building a freer and fairer America, and we all have to get behind those folks and put some wind in their sails and get those movements going, because we do stand a chance to be living in a healthy democracy, and our kids will inherit a healthy
Andrea,
democracy.
literally, that is exactly why I wrote my book, because I was like, it doesn't need to be doom and gloom. We can set ourselves on a different path, and we actually have all of the pieces to put together just in a different order to make us the country we tell the world we are. The reason Russia loves us falling apart is because it has always been them to say, like, don't look to America. There is no real democracy. Look, they're all liars. They're all cheats. They do what we do. Like, don't bother thinking it could be different. Because, Russia could always say, but America does elections differently. And America has free and fair elections. And America replaces their leaders. And if we become what they are, then there's no one to aspire to. And I really do believe that America could be this country we tell people we are, and it's not so far off.
Exactly.
I mean, the overall gist of Trump's 2025 plans for immigration are horrifying. I mean, not just the rounding up of millions of immigrants, but he's talking about, you know, his policies are going to deeply affect visas for foreign students, for foreign workers. It's going to raise diplomatic challenges all over the world. It's going to cause major fights in court. It's just, as somebody said, I thought it was such a good word, ambitiously xenophobic, right? Like the U.S. consulates around the world are supposed to extend their ideological screenings for visas, right? Blocking people for coming to America that they deem undesirable or have undesirable attitudes, right? And that's not just like, you can't be a Muslim. It's like, do you think free and fair elections are supposed to be? Do you think Trump is the best? That might be a question for foreign visa holders, right? This is terrifying stuff. I mean, we have people in this country right now who are on temporary protective status from certain countries that are deemed unsafe, and they're here and they're going to revoke that status. We have people here for humanitarian reasons, like the tens of thousands of Afghans who were evacuated after the Taliban came back into power in 2021, who had helped the United States and the United States Armed Forces, and they're over here. And those visas would be reassessed. They are talking about getting rid of people who protest the government. I mean, literally against the First Amendment. Like, if you speak up about the government, you can be deported. If you say something we don't like, you can be deported. We might not even let you in the first place if you think that protest is the way to go. It's just a sword over everyone's neck. And I think we really need to get incredibly serious about what he is offering the country and how bad it would be for every aspect of our nation.
Absolutely. I mean, it would create a brain drain. You'd have the best and brightest of America leaving the country, and that would include a lot of immigrants who came here to our universities, to our companies, to innovate, to contribute in a meaningful way. You'd have a massive brain drain. And once the brain drain starts, it's really hard to stop it. Just ask the hundreds of thousands of Russians that have fled Russia every year since the start of Putin's war 10 years ago. Brain drains weaken the country even further, but you also can't blame those people for leaving when the dictator is making daily living so unsafe.
Yeah. I mean, I think people need to get really serious about it. I mean, obviously, none of this is possible without Trump's dependency on his own xenophobic demagoguery and this ability to blame immigrants and other people and say it's their fault and the country's not working because these people, took it from you. And that is part of the whole message. That's how he's hoping to get elected. And they love it. These people are psyched. I mean, they are psyched to do this to people. Todd Schulte, who's an immigration and criminal justice advocate, said that these proposals are so authoritarian and their agenda would literally rip apart every aspect of American life. It would tank our economy. It would violate our basic human rights. It would violate our civil rights of millions of immigrants and native-born Americans. And I guess I kind of think like, well, what can we expect from someone who talks about poisoning the bloodline of a nation or calling people vermin? Because this is exactly, he's telling us exactly what he's going to do. And we need to be incredibly clear-eyed about the reality of that. Not like we don't have historical background for it.
Exactly right. We have one chance to stop him, and that is November 5th, 2024. And if we do not do it then, he's not going to give us another opportunity. There's not going to be an election in 2028. So we have one final chance to stop him. And so it's all hands on deck, everyone. And we're going to stop him because we have no choice.
I totally agree. We have no choice. He was restrained the first time. This time
he didn't know what he was doing
be.
the first time.
He did not know what he was doing, and there were still
people
what all
in
the
government.
Buttons
did. He's like smashing the buttons, and now he knows, what to push.
And he knows who to hire.
Exactly
and I think
right.
that's the thing. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Andrea. Ultimately, what we have to know is that authoritarianism in all of its forms has to be defeated, both here and abroad, right? Dictators in Russia and wannabe dictators here in America are all the same, and we need to defeat them in every single place. I just think, as you say, we cannot be the useful idiots that help this come into effect.
Exactly.
We have to be much smarter than that, and we cannot allow these people to do this to us. So before you go, tell people how they can follow your work or where to buy your books or see your films.
Well, anyone can watch Mr. Jones, my journalistic thriller, on Hulu, Amazon, iTunes. It's really a beautiful epic, and you could read Dictatorship. It's easier than you think, or at your local indie bookstore, wherever you get your books. And then check out In the Shadow of Stalin, the graphic novel adaptation of the Mr. Jones film. That is coming out from Oni Press, a great graphic novelist publisher. And check out my podcast, Gaslit Nation. And Lee, would love to have you on when your book is out and rally the troops, get everyone ready to show up on November 5th because we need them.
Yes. Show up on November 5th. Vote to save this country. Keep democracy's head above water. Tell democracy it can fight another day. And then let's build something far better than what we have right now.
Let's Trump-proof our democracy together.
Yes, let's. So that was Andrea Chalupa, reminding us that Trump wants to make America Russia, and Russia believes it's owed the world. The point here is that once you give a dictator power, they do not give it back. They just keep consolidating money and power around themselves until no one can touch them. That it is essential that we take our one chance in November to stop our dictator at home and use the power of our country and the world's democratic alliance to stop the dictators abroad. Enough of this monstrous, murderous, hateful, xenophobic bullshit. We all deserve better than these small-minded sociopaths in charge. I want to thank Andrea for joining us today and you for caring enough about democracy to be here. Now go and look up what happened at the G7 and the Ukrainian Peace Conference. That's news that you should know. Until next week, PG out. The Politics Girl podcast is written and performed by me, Lee McGowan, in partnership with the Meidas Media Network, and produced and edited by Happy Warrior Entertainment. All rights reserved.